Zephyr couldn't help but wonder if there was anyone left in this world who believed that all temples were entirely sacred and untainted by corruption. He leaned over to Rose and explained that the funds donated by worshippers continued to accumulate, leading to the development of entire cities around these religious sanctuaries. This was made possible because temple guardians and battle-bound servants like Zephyr ensured that malevolent creatures didn't encroach upon these revered grounds. Walking alongside Rose, Zephyr remarked that they were fortunate to secure a favorable deal for the predator, although he hadn't anticipated the sudden appearance of the ominous black spiders. To his surprise, Rose handed him a gleaming silver alchemist set, mentioning that he would require it later. Just then, Ned materialized seemingly out of thin air, calling out to them. It turned out that Ned was one of the 12 Class 1 evaluators, a highly skilled member recognized by the temple itself and the direct superior of Sahak, which left Rose feeling uneasy. Ned attempted to spirit Rose away for a private conversation, but Zephyr stepped in. Ned casually noted that Zephyr seemed to share a close connection with their mutual acquaintance, Sahak. Zephyr, however, couldn't resist needling Ned by suggesting that his memory wasn't particularly reliable and that he had a tendency to forget unimportant individuals. Tensions escalated as both Zephyr and Ned released their formidable auras, resulting in a clash of magical energies that sent reverberations through the atmosphere. Rose was taken aback, astounded by the sharp magical force emanating from their confrontation. It was evident to her that Zephyr was no ordinary battle-bound servant. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the temple guardians, if not surpassing them. Though Ned hadn't initially come looking for a fight, he decided to indulge in a bit of sport nevertheless, as they readied themselves to unleash their powers upon each other. Rose exercised her authority within the temple to command both of them to kneel. Constrained by the stigma of a servant's marking, they had no recourse but to heed the directive of the follower of the light, which was Rose. She then rebuked Zephyr with a stinging slap, demanding to know who he thought he was to pull such a stunt. Grasping him firmly, she declared her intention to impart a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. As they departed, she sneered at Ned, referring to Zephyr as her protege and cautioning Ned not to meddle, lest he face severe consequences. In a secluded corner, Rose admonished Zephyr, impressing upon him the imprudence of picking fights with everyone, especially someone as perilous as Ned. She was still trembling from the encounter. Ned was a Class 1 evaluator, and nobody knew the extent of his combat abilities because everyone who had witnessed them was no longer among the living. Rose continued to chide Zephyr, reminding him that he now served as her source of income. Later, she attempts to offer an apology for her swift slap and implores him to exercise caution beyond the temple's boundaries, where her protective shield cannot extend. Nevertheless, Zephyr dismisses her worries with a casual wave, explaining that his interaction with Ned was merely a friendly greeting. He adds that if Ned decides to take any untoward actions, Rose's ability to intervene would be limited. He leaves Rose in his wake and makes his way toward the laboratory. In a parallel narrative, Ned finds himself in a foul temper as he grapples with the effects of the engravement. Memories resurface of a time spent alongside his mentor, who had urged him to undergo this slave-like marking to evade suspicion among the followers of the light. Their comrades within the temple had been exposed and subsequently executed, leaving Ned's mentor convinced that only Ned possessed the capabilities to fulfill their mission. While there were purported methods to nullify the mark, they both agreed to bide their time for the opportune moment to employ them. Meanwhile, in a distant village, Sahak arrives and inquires about the local population. A passerby estimates that there are approximately 50 people nearby. Fully rejuvenated, Sahak retrieves a crimson flute and uses it to summon a malevolent entity lurking behind him. The demon descends upon the unsuspecting villagers with terrifying swiftness, sating its hunger on their lives as Sahak revels in the ensuing carnage. Empowered by his newfound abilities, Sahak believes he is now primed to exact long-awaited vengeance upon Zephyr. Before we continue, take a moment to answer the question of the day. What is the best martial art? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out. Now, back to the recap. In the laboratory, Zephyr meticulously assembled an assortment of diverse components. Blending them with venom harvested from the Spider Queen, he concocted a substance he dubbed Toxin Sovereign's Elixir 61. Turning to Rose, he made a solemn request. Zephyr marked a unique segment of wood from the remarkably resilient Arkan tree. Rose's curiosity was piqued, though she remained oblivious to his intentions. With the wood duly marked, Zephyr harnessed his arcane abilities to deliver a forceful strike, molding the log into razor-sharp needles. These needles, he elucidated, were acupuncture instruments utilized for therapeutic purposes in the East. He submerged them in 2 different toxins and allowed them to steep for a protracted 10 minutes. Now, poison might seem rudimentary, traditionally associated with harm, but everything changed when demons overran the realm. The deities stripped them of their powers, leaving humanity with only one reliable weapon: toxins. In a bold maneuver, Zephyr briskly thrust a cluster of needles into his hand. The torment was excruciating, even for the poison's creator. Agony rippled throughout his entire being as the toxins surged through his veins. Despite the overwhelming suffering, Zephyr did not relent. He promptly assumed a cross-legged posture and commenced cultivation. His inner energy coursed, combating the poison by circulating magical force. Zephyr held out hope that success would elevate his abilities to the next level. However, failure carried dire consequences. His corporeal form would splinter into countless shards. To him, this predicament didn't qualify as a crisis or genuine agony. He recollected his former life, where he had confronted Ned in a life-and-death duel and confronted the might of the demon god. Those were genuine trials. Several hours later, within the northern woods near the Sanctuary of Illumination, a magical signal shot skyward. A company of hunters was being pursued by a horde of monsters. They were outnumbered and incapable of repelling the creatures. One by one, the hunters succumbed to the avian-like monstrosities. The leader stood as the sole survivor, with more than 5 kilometers separating him from the sanctuary, a trek that would take over 20 minutes. As he stumbled, he glimpsed the approaching flock of birds, fully aware that he had less than 2 minutes before becoming their next victim. Just as the birds descended, a dagger descended from above. A meteor-like object plummeted toward the man, triggering a colossal explosion. It was Zephyr, his physical form now enhanced, mana radiating from his being. The remaining monsters descended upon him, yet Zephyr had grown markedly more potent. He effortlessly snapped one bird's neck, rending it as though it were paper. Surveying the remaining 12 avian assailants, he unleashed a barrage of 12 consecutive strikes, efficiently dispatching each one. After vanquishing the creatures, Zephyr inquired about the dungeon's location from the man. He reluctantly divulged it, and Zephyr wasted no time in setting off. The man lamented, revealing the dungeon's whereabouts, as 4 of his companions had met their demise within its depths, leaving only 3 to escape, and he stood as the solitary survivor. He wished he had warned Zephyr of the dungeon's perils, and waited for reinforcements. To his astonishment, shrieks resembling a massacre emanated from the dungeon. At daybreak, Zephyr emerged from the dungeon, bearing the boss's head. He felt remarkably agile, as if his attributes had tripled or quadrupled. His experiments had triumphed. Subsequently, he dispatched a green flare into the sky, signaling the resolution of the emergency crisis. Meanwhile, Saha continued his relentless rampage, moving from one settlement to another with an unyielding determination to ascend to a certain level of power before seeking retribution against Zephyr. Several days later, within the temple's sacred halls, word rapidly spread that Zephyr had single-handedly eradicated a perilous cockatrice nest. What made this achievement even more astounding was the fact that the alpha cockatrice leading the nest measured an astonishing 30 meters in length. Matthias, a seasoned investigator of heretical activities from the 3rd Division, relayed the incident to Lucius, the Temple Knight's commander. Both the comprehensive field investigation and the testimonies of survivors corroborated Zephyr's extraordinary feat, making him a highly appealing candidate for an imminent raid scheduled in 20 days. Matthias proposed conducting an inquiry into Zephyr's potential connections to the worship of demonic entities. However, Lucius disagreed and instructed Matthias to refrain from meddling with Zephyr, explaining that they couldn't afford to investigate as long as the worshipper proved beneficial. Despite Lucius's assurance, Matthias harbored concerns that the worshipper might have ulterior motives, potentially involving theft from the temple. Hidden within the temple's depths were 2 remarkable treasures: the Spear of Luminous Radiance and the Winged Shield of Michael, both acquired by Lucius at a considerable expense. Lucius reassured Matthias that he would become invincible in the forthcoming raid with these artifacts by his side. Back at their barracks, as the trio finished their preparations, Rose approached them. They greeted her with respectful nods, but she playfully reminded them about settling their outstanding debts on time. They couldn't help but wonder why Rose, known as the Demon Sister, emerged from their quarters. Zephyr sported a new ring, possibly a gift from Rose, prompting them to inquire about its origin. Zephyr clarified that it was a ring of purification, enhancing his mana flow and magic defense while granting him access to a daily skill called Curse Removal. Rose offered her assistance in acquiring anything Zephyr might require, stoking his determination. She had received information about the ring through an informant connected to the shadowy assassin guild known as Persephone. These legendary assassins were notorious for their precision and their use of poisons to enhance their lethality. Everything seemed to align, as Zephyr's enigmatic customer had ties to Persephone. Persephone had crumbled due to internal strife, but high-ranking nobles were actively seeking any survivors and their deadly toxins, willing to offer substantial rewards for their services. Rose decided to support Zephyr as much as possible, believing he should be by her side. Zephyr realized the misunderstanding but didn't mind the rumors circulating about him, hoping that his old friend would eventually locate him. Not only did Rose misconstrue their relationship, but Goethe also assumed that Zephyr had a close connection with her. Suddenly, a knock echoed at their door, and Dale went to investigate, discovering a piece of parchment affixed to the wall bearing an urgent directive for Goethe's group. Goethe pondered the identity of the messenger, but Zephyr recognized both the signature and the message. It was from Ned. Zephyr knew that Ned had prepared an invitation, but he insisted on going alone. Clad in a hunter's cloak, he dashed towards his destination with lightning-like speed. He had approximately 20 days until the Temple Knight's raid, and needed to ensure everyone understood the exceptional nature of this mission. The dungeon they were bound for was known as the Tomb of the Enigmatic Princess, one of the world's 8 mysteries, encompassing the ruins of the ancient Medea kingdom. For over a decade, countless attempts to conquer it had failed, with no one having reached the boss chamber. Thus, the criteria for joining the raid were exceedingly stringent. To be eligible, one had to belong to a hunting team ranked 5th or higher for the past year, be a direct servant of an approved priest, or possess a recommendation letter from such a servant. Recognizing that his team couldn't achieve a 5th rank in time, Zephyr devised a plan involving Ned, who served as the direct servant of the heresy examiner Matthias. Zephyr aimed to outmaneuver Ned and secure his recommendation letter, guaranteeing his entry into the raid party. There was no way Ned, driven by his crucial mission, would ignore Zephyr's challenge, especially given their shared practice of martial arts. Zephyr was confident that Ned was eager to test his skills. However, upon his arrival, it wasn't Ned who welcomed him. It was Sahak. Sahak questioned why Zephyr arrived solo, and even had the audacity to instruct him to depart. Zephyr had no inclination to engage in mind games with Sahak, who then unveiled that his facial scars bore the mark of Zephyr's actions, causing him sleepless nights. Sahak boasted about his newfound strength and prepared for combat. However, in the blink of an eye, Zephyr stealthily maneuvered behind Sahak and rendered him unconscious. Zephyr remained convinced that Ned wouldn't utilize Sahak as the sole instrument to assess him. To Zephyr's astonishment, Sahak reawakened, guffawing and brandishing a flute. He conjured a demon named Shoggoth and menaced to subject Zephyr to a protracted, agonizing demise. Shoggoth was a bioweapon harnessed by a worshipper of demon deities, and its presence was bewildering. Zephyr discovered that Shoggoth lay dormant in the form of an egg, and stirred to life upon hearing an instrument imbued with hypnotic power. Shoggoth was a mindless creature with an insatiable appetite, growing stronger by absorbing human mana. Yet, what made it truly chilling was the onset of mind corruption upon contact, inducing terror and hallucinations. Once mind corruption reached 100%, a frenzied state ensued. As individuals succumbed to frenzy, they lost control and unleashed harm upon everyone in their path, an efficient method of causing widespread devastation. Here stood a creation devised by devotees of demon deities, specifically engineered to facilitate mass slaughter. However, Zephyr remained undaunted, even when confronted by the creature known as Shoggoth. Zephyr's eyes began to glow red, a sign that he teetered on the brink of succumbing to frenzy, with his mind nearly entirely corrupted. Unbeknownst to Sahak, Zephyr possessed a special ring bestowed by Rose. He harnessed the ring's power to break the curse and incinerate the demon. Zephyr seized Sahak and reflected on his past, a time when his sole concern was the survival of himself and his comrades. But now, he contemplated the potential for collective survival through cooperation. Zephyr harbored doubts about Sahak being among those who shared this vision, prompting him to unleash a relentless onslaught, delivering a barrage of punches culminating in a powerful palm strike. This technique, known as the Dragon's Roar, struck fear into the hearts of Easterners. Sahak met a swift demise, and the electric surge appeared to intensify the pain inflicted. In the ensuing events, Zephyr seizes a flute since standard attacks prove ineffective against the formidable Shoggoth. He performs a melody that unravels the enchantment binding the Shoggoth together. Abruptly, a newcomer named Ned appears, taken aback by Zephyr's familiarity with the tune. Ned insists it's time for Zephyr to demonstrate his allegiance to the demon god worshippers, the sole means of instigating change. Observing the situation closely, Ned deems it necessary to eliminate Zephyr. He swiftly advances towards Zephyr, poised to strike. However, Zephyr adopts a concealed technique stance, rendering Ned incapable of landing a blow, despite launching 14 attacks. In a surprising turn, 3 stones imbued with crackling lightning auras assail Ned, underscoring Zephyr's prowess. Ned acknowledges that there are few individuals on the continent who can match his swordsmanship speed, perhaps only his mentor. This leads him to believe that Zephyr possesses an undisclosed ace up his sleeve. Questioning why Ned wields a sword against an unarmed opponent, Zephyr persuades him to discard the blade and assume an identical martial posture. They confront each other, mirroring each other's moves, setting the stage for a gripping showdown. Adopting the same principle as the thunderclap palm, Ned enshrouds himself in crackling electricity, gaining a burst of speed. Yet, Zephyr employs a precise countermeasure from his martial repertoire, completely neutralizing Ned's assaults. Ned finds himself increasingly perplexed. He believed that the secret art of the Dragon King style was exclusively taught to him and his elder brother. Therefore, he inquires, "Who is Zephyr?" The answer proves intriguing. Zephyr, known as the Lone Dragon, stands as a devoted worshipper of the demon god, holding the 9th rank and hailing from the Eastern Realm. He embarked on an arduous journey across the treacherous Sahara Desert, from the Eastern continent to the Aslan continent. There, he ascended the hierarchy of the demon god's cult with his enigmatic martial arts, the Dragon King style, and had 2 disciples. One was his biological son, named Strong Dragon, and the other was Ned Stryer, whom he had discovered on the Aslan continent. Having 2 disciples was deemed crucial for a profound comprehension of martial arts techniques, as their principles needed to remain shrouded in secrecy. Hence, only 2 successors were chosen. It became evident that Zephyr's acquaintance with this technique and his elimination of the Shoggoth, a prized asset of the cult, raised more than a few suspicions. Zephyr proceeds to elucidate to Ned that the explanation is relatively straightforward with a bit of contemplation. He reveals himself as a shadow apprentice, poised to step in if either of the 2 principal apprentices were to meet their demise. This covert apprentice serves as a hidden contingency, prepared in case of any unforeseen circumstances affecting the designated heir. However, their existence is terminated if the official successor successfully matures into their master's role. Zephyr astutely exploited this circumstance, and assuming his honesty, his true identity should be the most closely guarded secret. Ned couldn't suppress his curiosity about why their mentor had dispatched Zephyr to this mission. Zephyr clarified that he had received orders to conceal his true self from fellow worshippers of the demon god, and to engage in the raid using his individual prowess. Additionally, he revealed that he was designated as Ned's replacement in case of an emergency. Ned inquired whether Zephyr was aware of his specific mission, and Zephyr confirmed that Ned's task was to abscond with the Dragon Heart. Zephyr elucidated that the Dragon Heart was a magical gem forged within a dragon's heart, the most potent relic known to bestow abilities akin to those of a dragon. Zephyr conveyed his belief that the Temple Knights would be unable to match the electrical swiftness of the Dragon King style. Therefore, once Ned acquired the Dragon Heart, he would be invincible in his escape. Moreover, Zephyr reassured Ned that he possessed all the skills necessary for the mission, and disclosed that their mentor was concerned about sending only Ned. Admitting to a breach of orders, Zephyr confessed that he had enticed Ned with a flashy offer because the terms of raid participation were more intricate than he had anticipated. He was not inclined to take the difficult route when a simpler path was available. Subsequently, Zephyr confided a personal secret to Ned, whispering about the blood tears. These were the stolen treasures of Ned's family, and Zephyr had followed their mentor to recover them and exact vengeance on the temple. Only their mentor and Ned were privy to this plan. Ultimately, Zephyr informed Ned that he would disclose more when he deemed Ned trustworthy. Ned mentioned that there was a place he needed to visit first, and extended an invitation to Zephyr to accompany him. Perched atop an abandoned building near the temple, Ned introduced Zephyr as an individual sent by their mentor to aid in the mission against the demon god sect, affirming that he had verified Zephyr's identity. Matthias, another follower of the demon god, was unveiled as the leader of a group of 40, with Zephyr being the newly recruited member. Zephyr found this situation absurd, bordering on comical. These worshippers differed from Sahak, who heavily relied on artifacts and monsters, or from the Zephyr of the past, who had been driven solely by ambition. These demon god followers constituted an elite force formed exclusively for executing their mission. Zephyr contemplated a puzzling question. Why did these followers, each possessing considerable strength, choose to serve the demon god? Meanwhile, Ned suspected that Zephyr's revelation implied their mentor didn't have complete faith in him. The revelation of Zephyr's knowledge about the blood tears raised doubts about whether Zephyr was the true confidant of their mentor. Despite these uncertainties, Ned resolved not to falter, as their mentor had promised to aid in fulfilling Ned's vengeance if he became indispensable. In a circuitous manner, Ned recognized his reliance on their mentor for revenge, and to achieve this, he must acquire the dragon heart at any cost. Furthermore, considering the possibility that Zephyr might be groomed as his shadow disciple successor, Ned deemed it prudent to extend an olive branch. He reasoned that keeping Zephyr close would be the wiser choice if Zephyr harbored any intentions toward his life. Meanwhile, Zephyr perceived an opportunity to cultivate Ned's trust, believing that Ned would prove to be a valuable ally in the impending challenges. He had severed many connections in his past, but Ned was the first he desired to rebuild. Back then, Ned had presented him with a choice: master the ultimate martial arts technique or become forgotten. Ned remained his initial connection, the one who had imparted the Dragon King style. The following day, the members of the raid party for the terrifying princess's dungeon were revealed, in accordance with Zephyr's plan. With little time spent together, Dale sensed that Zephyr had a more significant purpose than they had imagined. Zephyr assured him that through continuous training, Dale could one day stand by his side. They said their goodbyes, and although they should have felt doomed, Zephyr was content to see the determination in their living eyes. However, they faced a dire threat because 3 years later, if the followers of the demon god succeeded in their summoning ritual, many, including Zephyr's newfound allies, would perish. To prevent this, Zephyr required the dragon heart. Next on his to-do list was acquiring equipment from Rose. The dungeon they were entering was teeming with animated moving skeletons. These undead beings felt no pain and were made entirely of unyielding bones. To defeat a skeleton, a blunt weapon was necessary. That's how you could break them. Zephyr was aware of this, but he had more pressing concerns within the dungeon. He selected a sword known as the Twilight Longsword. You see, it wasn't just skeletons within. The Temple of Light aimed to conclude the decade-long dungeon clearing campaign, and there were devoted followers of the demon god willing to fight for their cult's survival. Zephyr had to confront them all to secure the dragon heart, and that meant his entire party had become his adversaries. But there was another issue. Ned still harbored doubts about Zephyr. Even if Zephyr was speaking the truth, convincing Ned would not be a simple task. If Zephyr failed to persuade Ned and they ended up clashing, it wouldn't be a repeat of their previous encounters. It might continue until one of them was defeated. Then, an enchanter named Angelia appeared. She intended to infuse the sword Zephyr had selected with divine power. As it turned out, she was one of the most skilled enchanters in the temple. She enchanted all of Zephyr's equipment. However, despite the need to prepare for a showdown with his own comrades, Zephyr couldn't neglect dungeon preparations. With Angelia's assistance, his basic preparations were complete. Rose compensated Angelia for the enchantments, totaling 3,000 gold. Zephyr was pleasantly surprised that Angelia's backdoor enchantments were quite affordable. He expressed his gratitude to Rose for not charging him a commission, and realized she was willing to make certain sacrifices to earn his favor. Zephyr informed Rose that he had run out of money, which saddened her. He claimed he couldn't find anything valuable to give her. In the end, he revealed the 2 poisons he had prepared to her. Rose panicked, fearing they were the lethal poisons of Persephone, and implored him to hand them over. Zephyr agreed, but cautioned her not to sell them to a risky contact named Mole. He bid her farewell and departed. The following morning, the group gathered at the training area. Many individuals were present, but only a handful had survived Zephyr's previous life. Lucius, the leader of the group, and also the captain of the Temple Knights, warmly welcomed everyone. The raid party was split into vanguard and rearguard teams, led by 4 key figures: Arno, the healer captain; Leona, the rearguard captain; Matthias, the vanguard captain; and Lucius, the party captain. They were known as the Saint, bearers of divine marks. Lucius stated their intention to conclude the decade-long dungeon clearing effort with this raid, and encouraged everyone to endure the challenging training that commenced that day. While the group cheered and praised Arya, Zephyr scaled a cliff, convinced that the glory they spoke of was merely a facade. In reality, it wasn't about heroism or humanity. It was all about business. They engaged in politics to secure dungeon clearing privileges, recruited party members, and gathered investments to cover endless costs, such as labor, equipment, and potions. When the dungeon was finally cleared after many years, they constructed roads and cities on the newly safe lands, and investors reaped the benefits, including including increased land value. It was a colossal business venture, not just a heroic quest. The third grand temple of the Temple of Light stood proudly, serving as a base for St. Lucius to clear a perilous dungeon. The individuals who had joined the raid were meticulously trained, hand-picked elites. In the training area, the instructor explained that they should treat the light she summoned as if it were the enemy's magical attacks. If they got hit 3 times, they were considered defeated and had to step out with raised hands. The simulated battle commenced, and even though it was only a practice session, the soldiers found it quite demanding. However, Zephyr appeared to effortlessly penetrate the puppet, drawing Ned's attention. Ned warned him not to reveal the Dragon King style here. Together, they advanced towards the formidable golem. With agile movements, Ned leaped from puppet to golem, collaborating to defeat both. Their training objective was to eliminate 500 golems, and they finally achieved it, earning a 15-minute break. Arno was taken aback by Zephyr and Ned's performance. They were exceeding his expectations. He utilized his light magic to heal their wounds and relieve their fatigue, mentioning that with healers present, they could compress 4 weeks of training into just 2. As night fell, Ned declined the temple-provided food, concerned about maintaining his weight for maximum speed. Zephyr brought them plates of food, but Ned declined, explaining the need to remain lightweight for the mission. Zephyr decided to do the same, in case he needed to take over if Ned failed. Ned then questioned Zephyr's motives, wondering if Zephyr was still trying to outperform him. Zephyr reassured him, offering an expensive drink to keep warm. While sipping their drinks and watching the sunset, Ned inquired how much Zephyr truly knew about him. Initially, Ned had suspected that Zephyr wanted to eliminate him, but over the 2 weeks they had spent together, their relationship had evolved. Zephyr had displayed no intention of harming him during training. Ned pondered why Zephyr hadn't probed into Ned's deepest secret. So Ned asked Zephyr what he meant by saying he would reveal it when he considered Ned trustworthy. Zephyr noted that Ned had changed and emphasized that the crucial question wasn't about what Zephyr would ask, but rather the whereabouts of the Blood Tear sword and who possessed it. With a meaningful glance, Zephyr disclosed the sword's whereabouts and its story. It was the cherished possession of the Stryer barony, known as the Blood Tears, won by their forebearer after vanquishing desert demons. The king had bestowed the Baron title upon their family and entrusted them with safeguarding the sword through generations. Ned's father had conveyed to him that he would one day become a Baron and carry out this noble duty. His father urged him to become a worthy knight in honor of the sword's legacy. However, when the Baron requested the sword's return, the temple stepped in, asserting that he had used the Baron title and estate merely as collateral for a loan, not for the Blood Tears. The priest clarified that the Baron had relinquished his title, placing the sword under the temple's jurisdiction. This incensed him, prompting him to draw his sword against the priest. But before he could strike, the temple's knights intervened. One of them swiftly disabled both of his hands, while another thrust a blade into his abdomen. Ned could only watch in horror as his father met his demise before his eyes. The priest explained that if Ned's sword had reached him and harmed the bishop's son, who had noble blood, they would have had to execute Ned as well. This tragic event unfolded a dozen years ago, when excessive investments in dungeons led to economic crises as one raid after another failed, causing the dungeon bubble to burst. The Temple of Light profited by selling subpar goods, deceiving investors and maximizing their own profits. Much like Ned's father, many investors were left destitute and forced onto the streets. The main culprits were high-ranking priests, particularly Priest Aldean, who had swindled Ned's father, exploiting their friendship and claiming his life. Ned embarked on an unwavering quest around the world to find the Blood Tears, his family's symbol, of which he hadn't even heard a rumor. What astonished him was that his own mentor possessed the Blood Tears. Zephyr disclosed that recently, his mentor had unveiled information about the demon god cult and its 12 top members, the cult's highest-ranking figures. To Ned's astonishment, he discovered that the cult's leader and half of the 12 members were high-ranking priests of the Temple of Light. As they delved deeper into the dungeon, Zephyr planted seeds of doubt, suggesting that Ned's mentor might be planning to offer the cult leader the dragon heart he had brought with him. If that were to happen, they would never be able to apprehend him, and Ned's revenge scheme would crumble. Zephyr made a daring assertion, implying that they had been deceived from the very beginning. Ned couldn't fathom that his mentor, whom he regarded as family, had misled him. Doubt clouded his mind, pondering how Zephyr knew the words his mentor had spoken to him. He stood at a crossroads, torn between trusting his mentor and Zephyr's words. Before long, they reached the imposing gates of the dreaded tomb of the abominable princess. Lucius, their guide, swung open the massive gate leading to the temple's formidable dungeon, which they had been attempting to conquer for a full decade. The dungeon had 9 levels, but but the party was well acquainted with it after 10 years of exploration. They confidently passed through the Guardian of the 8th level. Although the monsters on this level had a different aura, the party remained eager to confront them. Matthias, their leader, expressed his enthusiasm for the upcoming challenges. Meanwhile, back at the Temple of Light, Bishop Alfonso, Lucius's uncle, engaged in a conversation with another priest. They faced a dilemma as all their fighters had departed for the raid. Alfonso conveyed his thanks to the other individual for lending them his defense force. Before we continue, let's take a moment to shout out Bertil Anderson 6606, who commented, "Brutal story, but he did nothing wrong," on our To Not Die video. Thanks for commenting. As Lucius ventured deeper into the 8th floor of the dungeon, they came across a formidable group of bone golems, much larger than the usual skeletons. A single blow from the golem sent several party members flying due to a powerful shockwave. The upcoming battle was about to become even tougher. The priestess, using her magic, summoned chains of light to try and restrain the golem. It appeared to work for a brief moment, allowing the party to attack while also defending against the skeleton warriors. However, the golem proved too strong, breaking free from the chains and charging towards the party. That's when Matthias, filled with hope, prayed to the goddess, causing his sword to glow brightly. In an instant, he struck the golem twice, forming a radiant cross with his sword. Matthias advised everyone to stay focused, mentioning that the one who summoned the golem, a skeleton mage, was probably close by. This mage was a mid-level monster with magic abilities and command over lesser skeletons. If they didn't defeat it quickly, more harm would come to their party members. To reach the mage, they had to push forward, leaving the rear vulnerable. However, Matthias had another task: locating an ancient tombstone. If he couldn't find it, the battle would become chaotic. Just when things seemed dire, Lucius stepped forward, wielding a brilliant spear and the winged shield of Michael. With a powerful beam of light, he wiped out the entire skeleton army and shattered the ancient tombstone that fueled the skeleton mage's power. Zephyr and Ned were left amazed by the saint's impressive show of power and his valuable equipment. With the 8th floor cleared, they took a break before Zephyr embarked on a secret mission from a previous life. Meanwhile, in a makeshift meeting room, Lucius informed the captain about the layout of the 9th floor and the boss they would encounter. To succeed this time, they needed to destroy all the scattered tombstones, learning from their past mistakes in last year's raid. As they approached the boss room's entrance, an undead army surrounded them from hidden passages, resulting in tragic losses. They couldn't afford to make the same mistake again. Their top priorities were to preserve Lucius's stamina and ensure he reached the boss room in peak condition. With his current strength, he could handle the monsters, but they couldn't risk a repeat of last year's morale drop. Inside the boss room, they faced a gatekeeper of incredible strength, capable of demoralizing them with a single glance. Suddenly, a Shoggoth appeared, surprising Matthias as he realized that the demon god worshippers had prepared 5 of them. However, they had more immediate concerns. At that precise moment, all 4 leaders instinctively focused on the same spot, their danger sensors more alert than ever. Zephyr pressed a concealed button, revealing a helm, and started to turn it. The layout of the 9th floor began to shift and change, with the floor's blocks moving in a perplexing manner. As the ground shifted beneath them, at the gathering of demon god worshippers the day before the raid, the party members were getting ready to be introduced, setting the scene for their upcoming epic battle. Matthias convened the group and reviewed the plan once more. He disclosed that Lucius had borrowed a legendary item called the Faithful Stake from the Pope. Lucius planned to use it to prop open the doors. When the demon god worshippers dealt with Lucius and moved him away from the entrance, Ned would swoop in to snatch the dragon's heart, and that's when they would awaken the Shoggoths. All they had to do was create an opportunity, and their leader would take care of Lucius. After that, they would exit the dungeon and inform the temple that they couldn't clear it. Matthias equipped the demon god worshippers with a vial to remove the slave's mark and a flute to command the Shoggoths. Now it was Zephyr's turn to activate the device. He double-checked to ensure everything went smoothly with all the healers present, and then summoned the Shoggoths. As he did so, he called for the party to surround them, making it easier for the healers to cleanse them. Zephyr triggered the device with the 4 leaders closely observing. Matthias couldn't help but wonder about Zephyr's intentions. It turned out that 3 years after the raid, the dungeon was used as a refuge from the demons. It was a protective device that reconfigured the dungeon's inner structure by shifting all the structural materials within it. Zephyr, having spent time there before, was familiar with the layout. What will happen next? Find out next time by staying tuned for our future recaps. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more great recaps.